So you may be wondering, okay, what do I do to stay healthy? Like, cool. I know some coping mechanisms now, but like, how can I actually keep my body healthy? Well, there are four different things we're going to talk about, and they might seem kind of obvious, but we're going to tell you, go into more depth on why they're true. So things like not smoking, cool. If you're going to drink, drink responsibly, eating healthy, eating wisely, and exercising regularly. So let's go through each of these one by one real quick. Starting off with not smoking. Smoking is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths per year. It is the most preventable cause of death in the US. We know that smokers tend to die about 13 to 14 years earlier than their non-smoking counterparts. And not just smokers themselves, but secondhand smoke. So when someone is smoking around individuals who are not, these individuals are getting smoked by secondhand. They're also facing detrimental like health concerns. So this might be things like increased risk for lung cancer, heart disease, birth complications, childhood asthma. All of these things can result from smoking. We also know that there are cultural differences in smoking rates. So this graph is kind of showing across the different states in the US. I believe this is from at least 2013 or maybe earlier, which states kind of had higher smoking rates. As of 2012, at least, I believe it was like around 18% of American adults still smoked. But there are cultural differences. So this is higher in different parts of the world. For instance, there's a high smoking culture in China and India, and this might contribute to high incidence of things like lung cancer in these other countries. Other related factors might be things like higher prevalence in men than women, ethnic minorities might smoke more, lower education and income, poorer mental health. All of these life stressors tend to lead people to smoke more. We also know that smoking is hard to quit. And part of the reason it's hard to quit is because it is addictive. It's made up of nicotine, and nicotine is an addictive drug. And we also know just from classical conditioning, if you think back to the learning chapter, if you're feeling stressed and you smoke a cigarette and that makes you feel happy again, you might start to associate that cigarette with happiness. You might start to reach for that cigarette anytime you feel like you need relief. And kind of some interesting statistics. It's harder for you to quit smoking if people around you smoke. That might seem kind of obvious, but they've shown that if your spouse smokes, your chances are reduced by 67% that you'll actually stop smoking. It's about 25% if your sibling smokes, and about 35% if a friend or coworker smokes. So it's hard. It's responsible for a lot of deaths. It's preventable, but it's hard to quit, and it's something that a lot of people who experience life stressors tend to resort to. Number 2, drinking responsibly. So we've kind of hinted at these words before. We talked about alcohol in the consciousness drugs lecture. So just to be clear, this is not saying that you can't ever drink an ounce of alcohol. What this is saying is that you need to know your limit. You need to be smart as far as, not driving home if you're drunk, not like knowing where your limit is and not going past it. Things can lead to some serious conditions if you abuse alcohol. So if you repeatedly use alcohol despite facing adverse consequences, maybe things like blacking out or doing dangerous activities or things like that, you're abusing alcohol. And it can lead to things like alcohol dependence. So this is when you start to get tolerance for alcohol. We talked about tolerance in the drugs chapter, where you start to need more and more and more of it in order to get that same type of high from it. But also withdrawal. So as soon as you stop, you kind of just go and you have these negative side effects from stopping, and you have that urge that you just need to keep drinking. You're in essence addicted to or dependent on alcohol. We know that alcohol is the 4th leading cause of preventable death in the US, and very common among people our age, among college students in particular. And there are a couple different risk factors for who is going to be dependent on alcohol versus not. So it could be a thing in your genes because nature plays a role in just about everything. It could be how early you were exposed to alcohol, but also different environmental factors like your social upbringing, what your parenting style, your parents' parenting style was like, whether you were neglected or not, mistreated or not, things like that. We know that socially anxious children, for instance, are more at risk for alcohol abuse. Um, and serious kind of alcohol dependence and addiction requires medical supervision and treatment in order to wean off of it. So what this graph is kind of showing is the withdrawal symptoms of alcohol. So if you were someone who's addicted to alcohol, after your last drink, you kind of go through 3 different stages and they vary in duration. But after about 1 to 2 days, you might face a lot of anxiety, insomnia, etc., high blood pressure. Up to a week later, you might start to experience hallucinations, fever, and seizures. And if you're not treated for it by a professional, that can last for up to weeks. So yeah, it often will require medical supervision because it's withdrawal from alcohol can produce some life-threatening seizures and symptoms. All right, a couple lighter ones. Eating wisely. So things like having good nutrition. We talked about how good this supports things like our memory, our mood, our health, our sleep. Just overall, good nutrition is great for you. And unfortunately, that's not always the case in areas like the US. So we have an obesity epidemic. This graph is showing you from 2018 from the CDC what percentage of the population of each state is obese versus not. So you can see these kind of darker colors. Ohio lands in one of the darkest colors of about 40% of our population is considered obese by medical terms. And part of the reason that is because we have in America ready access to food. Food is everywhere around us. Our bodies are meant, we just eat all of the time, and especially because we're sitting at home, or like for those of us who are staying in for the pandemic, like I have access to my fridge 24/7 right now. Food is everywhere. And we also, you've probably experienced this at fast food restaurants, for instance, things like getting a cheeseburger from McDonald's off the dollar menu is a lot cheaper than maybe buying a higher quality nutritious salad or a nutritious meal from a restaurant that tries to proportion out nutrients better. So because things are cheaper, we tend to go to those unhealthy foods more. But also obesity epidemic, we talked a lot about this in the psychological disorders section on eating disorders in particular and body dysmorphia disorder. We compare our weight to others all the time. Comparison is the theft of joy. And as much as like we might hear that, I know myself, like I compare myself to others all the time. So we'll look at people around us and we'll be like determining, how we're doing with our weight compared to how other people are doing. We know that, if you're close others, if people around you are also obese, having an obese spouse, for instance, increases your risk of obesity by about 37%. Having obese friends increases your risk by 50%. So instead, what might work a little bit better for you, things like focusing on your nutrition, focus on what you're able to control. There are so many factors that play into things like weight, whether it's your genetics or your stressors or whatever. So again, one of our coping mechanisms is a sense of control. So do what you can to control what food you put in your fridge. You can control when you eat, how often you eat, things like that. Lastly, exercise. Exercise does so much for our body. Again, we hit on this in the memory lecture. It improves your memory, your cognitive performance. It improves your psychological health. We talked about it as a treatment for depression. It improves your cardiovascular health and your immune system. It does like everything, right? There's a study from your book that shows that sedentary behavior, So basically, what we're doing now with remote learning, sitting in a chair all day long, leads to poorer health. So what this graph is showing, this graph is from your book, is individuals who spent different amounts of time sitting in their chairs. So from almost none of the time, these are really active individuals, to almost all of the time. So they spend almost their entire day in a chair or sitting down in some sort. And they followed up with these individuals years and years and years later. So from the time the study and survey was taken up to about 14 years past that point. And what you see on the y-axis is how likely they were to survive or not. And the key takeaway here is that you see this red line, the line where people weren't exercising and they were just sedentary the whole time, has a much steeper death rate and is way more likely, only about 80% or so of those participants were still living 10, 12 years later. Compared to the group that were exercising a lot, it was a lot higher. So exercise, better health, longer life, overall, just all of the improvements. So exercise is good for you. And they say just, even just 30 minutes a day is enough to get you some of these benefits.